It was late September, and my friend Jenna and I decided to take a spontaneous road trip through the heart of Nevada. We were both in our mid-20s, working jobs that felt more like placeholders than careers, and the itch for adventure was real. We left on a Thursday, hoping to avoid the weekend traffic and crowds at popular spots. Our destination was a little-known state park known for its stark beauty and ancient rock formations. The drive was supposed to take us 6 hours, but with Jenna's love for obscure roadside attractions, I knew we'd take longer. True to form, we found ourselves pulling over for every historical marker and quirky diner, making the journey part of the adventure. As evening approached, we were still a couple of hours away from our intended campsite. The landscape had shifted from the bustling suburbs to vast stretches of desert, punctuated by the occasional ghost town or abandoned mine. The beauty of the setting sun against the desert backdrop was mesmerizing, but as darkness enveloped us, a sense of isolation crept in. Jenna, ever the optimist, was unfazed. She joked about the desolation, spinning tales of outlaws and pioneers who might have traversed these parts. I played along, but couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Our laughter and chatter were the only things filling the silence of the desert. That's when we noticed the road ahead was closed, detouring us onto an even less traveled path. The GPS struggled to recalibrate, flickering between routes before settling on a narrow, two-lane road that seemed to stretch into oblivion. With no cell service to speak of, we trusted the GPS's judgment, turning onto the road as twilight turned to night. The further we drove, the more the road seemed to deteriorate. Potholes became craters, and the painted lines were all but faded away. Jenna's car, a reliable sedan not made for rough terrain, jostled us with every bump. We joked nervously about being on the road less traveled, trying to keep the mood light. Then, Jenna's car sputtered and died. We coasted to a stop, the engine silent, the only light coming from the dashboard's glow. We stared at each other, the gravity of our situation sinking in. Stranded, in the middle of the Nevada desert, with no cell service and miles from civilization. Jenna tried the ignition again, but the car refused to start. We considered our options. Waiting in the car for a passerby seemed the safest bet, but given the road's apparent disuse, we weren't confident anyone would come. The idea of spending the night in the car was daunting, the desert's nocturnal creatures and the chill of the night air adding layers of concern. As we debated, a light appeared in the distance. It was moving toward us, slowly at first, then gaining speed. Relief washed over us at the thought of being rescued, but as the light drew closer, it didn't illuminate the road as headlights would. It was a single, dim light, bobbing slightly as it approached. Jenna and I exchanged puzzled glances. There was something eerie about the light's approach, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't a car. It wasn't making any sound, just a silent, solitary light moving through the desert night towards us. We locked the car doors, watching as the light came closer, then past us, revealing nothing behind it. No person, no vehicle, just darkness. As it moved away, fading into the distance, the unease turned to fear. What was it? And more importantly, what did it mean for our chances of getting out of here? The night stretched on, each passing hour amplifying our sense of vulnerability. We took turns trying to sleep, but the desert's nocturnal sounds and the memory of that unexplained light kept us alert, on edge. It was in those long, dark hours that we realized the true nature of our adventure, far removed from the light-hearted road trip we had envisioned. As dawn began to break, painting the desert in hues of pink and gold, we decided that once the sun was fully up, we'd have to leave the safety of the car and try to find help. The thought of walking through the desert was daunting, but the alternative, remaining stranded, wasn't an option. We prepared ourselves as best we could, filling our water bottles with the last of our water supply and donning hats and sunglasses to protect against the relentless sun. Before setting out, Jenna gave the ignition one last try, more out of hope than expectation. The car remained silent, its battery as dead as our cell phones. We locked the car behind us, taking a moment to orient ourselves. The road stretched out in both directions, its path barely discernible in places where the desert seemed to be reclaiming the land. We chose to follow the direction we'd been heading, hoping it would lead us to the park or any sign of civilization. The desert, so beautiful at a distance, was unforgiving up close. The heat quickly became oppressive, and what little shade there was did little to offer respite. We walked for hours, our conversation dwindling as we conserved energy, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. It was mid-morning when we finally saw a vehicle in the distance. At first, we thought it was a mirage, a trick of our hopeful brains, but as it drew closer, we saw it was a truck, battered and coated with dust, the first sign of life we'd seen since the night before. The truck slowed as it neared us, and the driver, a man in his late 50s with a weathered face and kind eyes, rolled down the window. He asked if we were okay, and upon hearing our story, insisted on driving us to the nearest town. We climbed into the truck, the relief of being in the presence of another human being indescribable. The man, who introduced himself as Carl, was a local who knew the desert like the back of his hand. He explained that the road we'd been on was rarely traveled, known for its rough conditions and lack of cell service. As we drove, he shared stories of the desert, its dangers, and its beauty. When we asked about the light we'd seen the night before, Carl fell silent for a moment before continuing. He told us of an old mining camp, abandoned in the early 1900s, not far from where we'd been stranded. Some locals believed it was haunted, the spirits of miners lost in accidents wandering the desert. The light, he speculated, might have been one of those lost souls, though he was quick to add he'd never seen it himself. Carl's story added a layer of mystique to our ordeal, transforming it from a mere tale of survival to one tinged with the supernatural. He dropped us off at a service station in the small town, where we were able to call for a tow truck and finally make contact with our families. The rest of our journey was uneventful in comparison, but the experience left its mark on us. We returned home with a deeper respect for the unpredictability of nature and a story that seemed almost too surreal to be true. Jenna and I often reflect on that trip, the bond forged through adversity and the mysterious light in the desert, a reminder that some things defy explanation. When I decided to spend a weekend camping in the backcountry of the Appalachian Mountains, I was more concerned about bears than boogeymen. Little did I know, I was about to confront something far more unsettling than wildlife. I set out early on a Friday, my backpack loaded with essentials for a weekend in the wilderness. The weather forecast was clear. The hike in was uneventful, the scenery breathtaking. By late afternoon, I'd found the perfect spot to set up camp, a small clearing near a stream, with a good view of the valley below. After setting up my tent and gathering some firewood, I settled down to enjoy the peace and quiet. The only sounds were the gentle babble of the stream and the occasional bird call. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the clearing, I felt a sense of contentment wash over me. This was exactly what I'd been needing, a chance to reconnect with nature. But as darkness fell, a thick fog began to roll in from the valley, swallowing the landscape in a ghostly white shroud. It wasn't long before I could barely see a few feet in front of me. The fog gave the forest an eerie, otherworldly feel, transforming the familiar into something alien. I stoked the fire, hoping the light and warmth would dispel the creeping unease that had begun to settle over me. I was about to turn in for the night when I heard it, a soft, barely audible footstep, as if someone, or something, was moving through the fog just beyond the circle of light cast by the fire. I strained my ears, but the sound didn't come again. I chalked it up to my imagination, the result of the fog playing tricks on my mind. Just as I was about to zip up my tent, I saw it, a figure, standing at the edge of the clearing, barely visible through the swirling fog. It was motionless, silent, just watching. Its stillness was unnatural, as if it were not breathing or even alive. I called out, "Hello? Do you need help?" But there was no response. The figure just stood there, an ominous silhouette in the fog. A chill ran down my spine, a primal fear taking hold. I knew I should approach, offer assistance, but my feet were rooted to the spot. I couldn't bring myself to move closer. After what felt like an eternity, the figure slowly began to fade, the fog swallowing it up until there was nothing left but the white, impenetrable mist. I stood there for a long time, staring into the fog where the figure had been, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Eventually, I retreated into my tent, but sleep eluded me. Every sound seemed amplified in the silence, and the fog pressed in on all sides, a tangible reminder of the night's eerie encounter. I lay awake, listening, waiting, but the figure did not return. By morning, the fog had lifted, and the clearing was as it had been the day before. Tranquil, beautiful, with no sign of the previous night's visitor. I wanted to believe it had been a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination, but the fear I'd felt was all too real. I packed up camp, eager to leave the clearing and the unsettling experience behind. But as I made my way back through the forest, the feeling of being watched lingered, a shadow that followed me every step of the way back to civilization. My friends and I decided on a weekend camping trip to Appalachia, drawn by tales of its lush landscapes and rich history. Our group, consisting of 4 close friends since high school, set our sights on a less frequented part of the region, where sprawling forests promised the perfect backdrop for our adventure. The area we chose was known for its scenic beauty, but also for its isolation, providing us the solitude we craved. We arrived in the late afternoon, the sun casting long shadows through the dense canopy above. The air was filled with the scent of wet earth and pine, a welcome change from the pollution of the city. After setting up camp, we gathered around the fire, sharing stories and enjoying the peace that only nature can offer. As the night progressed, a fog began to roll in, thick and oppressive, reducing our visibility to just a few feet. The sounds of the forest seemed amplified within the fog, every rustle and snap sending shivers down our spines. We joked nervously about the setting feeling like the start of a horror movie, not realizing how prophetic our words would be. Sometime around midnight, we heard the faint sound of music drifting through the fog. It was an old tune, the kind you'd expect to hear on a gramophone. Curiosity piqued. We debated whether to investigate or stay put. Ultimately, we donned our jackets, grabbed a flashlight, and ventured into the fog in search of the source. The music led us deeper into the forest, its volume ebbing and flowing as if carried by the wind. The dense fog and the disorienting music made it difficult to keep a sense of direction, but we pressed on, driven by a mixture of fear and fascination. Suddenly, the music stopped, and we found ourselves in a clearing. In the dim light provided by our flashlights, We could see that the ground was littered with old, rusted objects, tools, toys, even pieces of furniture, as if we had stumbled upon the remains of a forgotten settlement. The air here felt different, heavier, as if charged with the echoes of the past. Without warning, the music started again, louder now, and seemingly from all around us. We turned in circles, trying to locate the source, but it was impossible. The fog, now thicker than ever, seemed to swallow the beam of our flashlights, rendering them almost useless. That's when we saw them, shadows moving in the fog, circling the clearing. Not one or two, but many, drifting silently around us. Panic set in, and we decided to make a run for it, back to the safety of our camp. But the forest had become a maze, the familiar landmarks obscured by the fog. We ran, driven by primal fear, until, by some miracle, we stumbled upon our camp. The relief was short-lived, however, as we realized the music followed us, a haunting melody that seemed to mock our escape. We packed up in a frenzy, abandoning the idea of spending another minute in those woods. As we made our way back to the car, the fog began to lift and the music faded, leaving us in silence once more. We drove home in near silence, each lost in thought, trying to process the night's events. To this day, we don't speak much of that trip. The experience left us with more questions than answers, a chilling reminder of the mysteries that lie hidden in the depths of the old forests. We learned that some places hold secrets, secrets that are best left undisturbed, for the echoes of the past are not always mere memories, but sometimes they are very much alive.